All right, ladies and gentlemen, we ended right here about the moral argument. We covered the cosmological argument and teleological argument. And as I said, there's a whole bunch more in the book and on the DVD set. We're abbreviating a bunch of this. But let's go to the moral argument. In April of 1945, the Allies liberated the Buchenwald concentration camp in Wiedmar, Germany. I had the opportunity to visit there a few years back. And they went through the front gate, which is still there, and then they looked off to the right and saw the crematorium about 100 yards off in the distance, and it's still there. When they got to the crematorium, they looked into the courtyard attached to the crematorium, and this is what they saw. Brace yourself. Now, if there is no God, this is just a matter of opinion. It's just your opinion against somebody else's opinion, Hitler's opinion. But we all intuitively understand that this is objectively morally wrong. It's not just a matter of opinion. If it's objectively morally wrong, there must be a source, an authoritative moral standard out there that establishes this as being morally wrong, and that's what we mean by God's nature. Look, the question here is, how do you know who's right and who's wrong? Is it Mother Teresa or Hitler? How could you discover? Well, let me ask the question this way. How do you know which map of Scotland is better? Is it map A or map B? Well, in order to discover which map is better, what would you need to see? Yeah, you would need to see a real unchanging place called Scotland, right? If Scotland doesn't exist, then these two maps are meaningless. But since Scotland does exist, we can see map A, while it's not perfect, is a better representation of the real map or the real Scotland than is map B. In other words, you have a standard to which you can measure the two options. That's exactly what we do when we compare Mother Teresa and Hitler. Mother Teresa wasn't the standard. Hitler wasn't the standard. There's a standard beyond both of them by which we measure both of them. And we say Mother Teresa measured up to the standard better than did Hitler. If the standard didn't exist, there's no way to say which one was better or worse. If there's no best, then there's no way to figure out who's better and who's worst. In fact, if there is no God, then what the Nazis did was not really wrong. I was at Michigan State doing a presentation like this once, and sitting over on this side of the audience during the Q&A, there were a couple of atheists, and we got talking about morality. And so I asked one of the atheists, I said, well, you're an atheist, but how do you come up with morality? What's morality in your worldview? He said, whatever the majority decides is morally right. I said, are you telling me that if you lived in Nazi Germany that murdering Jews would be morally right? And he paused, he blushed, and he said, yes. And his atheistic buddy sitting right next to him looked at him and yelled, no! The first kid knew in his heart the answer was no, but in order to be consistent with his atheism, he had to say yes. Actually, on atheism, there is no morality. Everything's a matter of opinion. Who says the majority gets to decide? It's whoever has the most power imposes his relativistic will on anybody else. There's no standard. We're molecules in motion. How do you get morality from that? If there is no God, then love is no better than rape. Not in an objective way, anyway. If there is no God, there are no human rights. Martin Luther King didn't do anything good. Why? Because there's no such thing as best out there. There's nothing wrong with racism if there's no God. There's nothing wrong with anything if there's no God. Wilberforce, who freed the slaves, Lincoln, who freed the slaves, they didn't do anything right or wrong. It's just all a matter of opinion if there's no God. If there's no God, tolerance is no better than intolerance. By the way, if there's one absolute in our culture today, it's tolerance. But I've noticed the people who say they're fighting for tolerance are often the most intolerant people out there. Have you noticed that? By the way, are Christians commanded to be tolerant? No, we're commanded to be loving. You see, tolerance is too weak. Tolerance says, hold your nose and put up with them. Love says, reach out and help them. And in order to love somebody, quite frequently, we wouldn't be loving. And the problem here is that you have to have some courage to exhibit true love, which means you have to stand for the truth, even if people won't like you for it. Also, if there's no God, religious crusades are not wrong. I always hear atheists talking about religious crusades. Christopher Hitchens brought them up in the debate I had with him, and I said, Christopher, you're right. Religious people have done evil things. But on your worldview, there's no such thing as good or evil. It's all a matter of opinion. So what's wrong with religious crusades if there's no God? And of course, you can't complain about the problem of evil if there is no God. It's commonly thought that evil somehow disproves God among the general public, but that's not the case at all. Most philosophers know that can't be the case. In fact, C.S. Lewis for many years thought that evil disproved God until one day he had an epiphany. He ultimately became a Christian, but when he was an atheist, he thought there was too much injustice in the world. And after he had his epiphany, he put it in a book called Mere Christianity, and here's what he wrote. He said, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust, but how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? You have to have a standard by which to judge right from wrong. What is that standard? If there's no God, then nothing is ultimately good, which means nothing is ultimately evil. You see, evil doesn't disprove God. Evil may prove there's a devil out there, but it doesn't disprove God. Why? Because there'd be no such thing as evil unless there was good, and there'd be no such thing as good unless God existed. You could put it this way. The shadows prove the sunshine. In order to have shadows, you have to have sunshine. In other words, in order to have evil, you have to have good. Oh, you can have good without evil. You can have sunshine without shadows, but you can't have shadows without sunshine. You can't have evil without good. So evil doesn't disprove God. It's actually a backhanded argument for God. So, let me skip over this because I don't have time to cover it. Let me point out that from these three arguments that we've just been through, and again, there's a lot more in the book on the three arguments, but from these three arguments, we can draw some conclusions about the characteristics of God. From the cosmological argument, we can see that this being is immaterial, timeless, and spaceless. Why? Because he created material, time, and space, so he can't be made of material, time, and space. He must transcend it. Also, we can see that he's extremely powerful because he created out of nothing. Do you realize that everything we create out of pre-existing material? God creates out of nothing. Try creating out of nothing. Try creating out of what rocks dream about. Nothing. Also, from the design argument, we can see he's extremely intelligent. He put this universe together with extreme precision. And he also sustains creation and has purpose. We're here for a reason, and he's sustaining us right now. Paul put it this way, in him we live and move and have our being. In Christ, or he said, Christ holds all things together. He created the universe and sustains the universe. From the moral argument, we can see he's absolutely morally perfect, and we can also see he's personal. How do we know he's personal from the moral argument? Because you only sin against persons. You don't sin against, say, the law of gravity, an impersonal force. Like when you go try and dunk a basketball, you're not sinning against the law of gravity. You only sin against persons. We also know that this being is personal from the cosmological argument. Why? To go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice, and only persons make choices. Gravity, for example, doesn't make choices. Gravity doesn't go, look, if Turek drops that remote one more time, I'm not going to pull it to the ground. Right? Gravity just does the same thing over and over again, which means whatever created the universe must be a personal being. Now take a look at the attributes here. We have an immaterial, timeless, spaceless, extremely powerful, extremely intelligent, sustaining creator who has purpose, who is also absolutely morally perfect and personal. This is the God of biblical Christianity identified without reference to the Bible. We haven't even opened the Bible yet we have the attributes of the God of the Bible. Now, does this mean that the God of the Bible actually exists? Well, not necessarily. It means a theistic God exists who is like the God of the Bible, but it could be another theistic kind of God, right? Here are the major theisms out there. You've got Judaism, of course, Christianity, and Islam. Maybe just the Jewish concept of God is true, or the Islamic concept of God is true. If God really wanted to tell us which one of these theisms is true, what could he do? He could do something only he could do, and that would be a miracle. You see, that's point 3.